Welcome to Weather and Earth 25, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this interesting video I've got for you for November 2022 and the natural disaster risks that this month could bring to the world. It is currently early morning hours of November the 3rd, and I've come up with this chart right here, which is the main picture to look at to try to figure out what could be happening in the days ahead. It has 4 lines on the chart, and 3 of these correspond to the numerology, Chinese astrology, and the tropical zodiac that I look at to try to see how they correlate to each date of the month and how they come together and what kind of aspects they bring forth to certain days of the month of November. At the bottom part, you'll see a horizontal line at number 1, which is in effect for the majority of November. That's thanks to the tropical zodiac and is more than anything just a seasonal factor that carried over from late October that ends on November the 27th, which is just a small extra boost that tends to happen for certain parts of the year, and it tends to be a slightly more active time than normal thanks to the Western astrology sign of Scorpio that is present for the majority of November and late October for that matter. But more importantly, we take a look at numerology and Chinese astrology. This changes a lot from day to day, and it is a lot more dynamic and has a lot more say in what could happen on certain dates. Numerology is in the lighter green line and Chinese astrology is in the blue line. And you can see how they move up and down as days go on. We take all these lines and add them together, and the product becomes the yellow-orange line, which is on the top part of the graph. That is the total risk for each day according to these 3 parameters of zodiac from the tropical, Chinese astrology, and numerology. November 3rd is the first risk date of the month of November. The risk dates occur from level 6 upwards. As you can see, I got on the left hand side a column that goes from 0 to 11, and dates that score 6 or higher are considered risk dates, with 6 being low, 7 being medium, 8 being high, and 9 and above being very high. One thing is obvious right here. The month of November has a lot of dates that score 6 or higher. So it is definitely looking like a very active month for events. One of these reasons is the numerology, and I'm going to give a little example of how this numerology looks for the month of November, so you have an idea where I'm getting this graph information. This is an numerology chart for November 2022. Actually, not an numerology chart. This is just pure numerology. An 1125 chart for November 2022. 1125 is a numerology phenomenon that has a lot of implications for dates that can have major natural disasters. This is something that I've actually talked about in the previous video that I made, where I was warning about Hurricane Ian. As you may have known by now, Hurricane Ian devastated southwestern Florida on September the 28th, 2022. It was a day that was dominated by the number 25 because that number was the sum of the whole date, 9282022. You add those numbers, you get 25. This chart shows the presence of 11 and 25 for this month of November. And there's different ways you can find these numbers, but the most important sums would happen to be on the columns that are more towards the left of this chart. Like the one there that has the month, day, and year in magenta, the one that's in red, month, day, and year with 2 digits, and then some of the other numbers that are in the yellowish columns of month and day number, and the day plus the whole year. Long story short, looking at the presence of 11 and 25 on, for each date in November, we can give a pretty good estimate of how much significance this has, and pretty much the dates in yellow and red are the ones to focus on, where I would say yellow would correspond to a date that has fairly significant amount of these numbers in this numerology chart, and red dates being the most powerful versions of 11 and 25. And as far as like a perfect sum to 25 is concerned, similar to what we saw back in September, we got November 8th, November 17th, and November 26th as really good examples of dates in which the entire month, day, and year adds up to the number 25. And just like 25, number 11 is another number we look for, when these things happen. So this chart is showing you where both 11s and 25s exist for certain dates, and depending on where they are on the chart dictates how much impact they have on that date. So this numerology chart is really active, and 1125 numerology is not the only type of numerology that we look at, but it is the most significant. Now back to this chart that I was showing you earlier. Now that I showed you a little bit of the numerology and stuff, I can just quickly tell you right off the bat, these are the risk periods for November 2022. November 3rd is by itself. It's the only day between November 1st and November 5th that reaches anything higher than level 6. It is a level 7.5. November 5th is the next risk date, but that one is not by itself. It is followed by November 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th. Even though November 6th and 7th are just above the level 6 mark, or at the level 6 mark, they're still considered risk dates. So this is actually a grouped risk date period and a candidate for possibly having weather events of longer nature. Whereas November the 3rd is more likely to have significant sudden natural disasters, such as earthquakes or landslides. November the 12th is similar to November 3rd. It's a risk date by itself, a fairly powerful one too. And then it is followed by another longer risk period, which covers November the 14th all the way to November 21st. That one is more similar to the one right now that's going to be happening November 5th through November 10th. Several risk days back to back. So we're not just thinking about probable, sudden events that happen in a single day. We could be looking at several days worth of natural events such as severe weather or flooding events or hurricanes and typhoons for that matter. Tropical cyclones do happen during these longer risk day periods. And then we have another long period from November 23rd up until November the 28th. Then the last risk date, November 30th, it's more like a sudden type of day. So we may have another chance of having an earthquake then. So just remember that, guys, because I will go a little more into detail now how this graph and chart highlights certain days of the month for certain types of events that can happen around the world. So remember this chart because we're about to proceed. Okay, guys, so keeping in mind the astrology and numerology of November and which days it makes more risky, it's also important to acknowledge certain things that are going on in the world of meteorology and geology that can help us better predict what could happen on these risk dates. One of these important things to consider is that we are in a current La Nina phenomenon in meteorology, which is when the Pacific Ocean near the equator is cooler than average, and it tends to have a large scale impact on climate patterns. One of these big impacts that La Nina years tend to have is that it makes the Atlantic Ocean much more active than normal when it comes to tropical storms and hurricanes. And this is not just any La Nina phenomenon. We are actually in what meteorologists call a third year La Nina, which means this is the third year in a row that we've had this phenomenon. And there are very few years like this one that have happened in the past. One of the more close analogs of this season would be 2001 and 1985, according to many meteorologists who analyzed this, which are the closest thing we've had to third year La Ninas in recent history. And lo and behold, both of those years featured very active Novembers in the Atlantic Ocean. 2001 had 3 named storms in the month of November, including 2 hurricanes, one of them being a very powerful Category 4 in the Caribbean that went on to affect Cuba. And 1985 had an extremely rare late November hurricane of major Category 3 strength that took a very odd track as if it was September, going from east to west across the Bahamas and southern Florida, like south of the Keys, and then curving up to hit the west side of the state of Florida on November the 21st of 1985. So that's something to consider because a lot of these dates in November do favor longer duration events, and I would not be surprised if a lot of these dates did manifest as more tropical storms and hurricanes over in the Atlantic Ocean, possibly making this November one of the busiest, if not the busiest, November on record when it comes to the tropics and the Atlantic Ocean. Another thing to consider is the same La Nina phenomenon can also fuel significant severe weather outbreaks in parts of the central United States, similar to what happened last year in the month of December with those killer tornadoes that struck Kentucky. Would not be out of the question to see something similar in severity with nasty tornadoes towards the middle to late part of November as well this year. Just stuff to keep in the back of our minds when it comes to meteorology, as well as typical locations of the world that usually see lots of tropical storms activity and bad weather, which would include the Philippines and areas around there in the Western Pacific, which are a hot spot in the month of November most of the time, and they're definitely under the gun this year, in my opinion as well. Because back in 2020, we had similar conditions, and they got a really powerful typhoon in the Philippines then as well. So you will see how these things tie into the predictions, in the next few minutes. But before we go on with that, I also want to, mention that October in particular featured a slight increase in stronger earthquakes around magnitude 6 to magnitude 6.8 that have been happening around the world, especially in places like South America. And we also had another set of earthquakes around the Philippines, Southeast Asia. Those seem to be like the places that are starting to heat up and are going to be more likely locations to have events in the month of November just based on recent earthquake activity. Earthquake predictions are a very difficult thing. The only way we could probably guess on where these things could happen is based on recent earthquake activity. And from there on, the astrology and numerology can help pinpoint those sudden risk dates. In other words, the dates that are by themselves, or dates that are the very beginning of a risk period, where the big change occurs from no risk to high risk. Those are the more likely earthquake dates, and that can help a little bit as well. So that's all I can say verbally. I would now like to present the rest of this prediction video in the style that I've always done it. Visually, you will read the scenarios that I personally think could happen in the month of November, and they're in order from scenario 1 to scenario 3 or even scenario 4, in order from most likely to less likely. And more than one scenario could actually happen this month because of how many risk days we have. This is what I think could happen. And I will also show maps with colored regions to watch, depending on how risky they are, with certain colors meaning more risk than others, and most importantly, with the risk dates at the bottom. So you guys can have a visual idea of where we could have certain natural disasters this month and when they can happen. So you will see where we could see tropical storms and hurricanes and when we can have them. You will see where we could have strong earthquakes and when we can have them. I'm taking a combination of this esoteric numerology astrology thing and combining it with actually a little bit of what's going on in the real science world of meteorology and geology, and hopefully this prediction helps you guys out to some point and makes an impact. I hope you guys find this useful, and without much further ado, here we go. This is my November 2022 prediction coming at you. Alright guys, so that's how November 2022 is looking. Things look fairly active compared to the last month that we've seen in October. And I think this month might actually be up about September's level of intensity with respect to natural disasters around the world. We may see several events happening, including more tropical storms, hurricanes, and typhoons, possibly some severe weather and tornadoes of significance, and also at least a few stronger earthquakes, possibly one or two very powerful major earthquakes. Basically, everything is on the table for the month of November. It really does look like an above average type of month for natural disasters. Do keep in mind though, this is all just probabilities and risk. It's not 100% that these things are going to happen, but more than likely this month will be a busy one. I really wish I had better news, but this is how things are looking from this point of view. And I felt the need to share this with you guys and post this video update, and hopefully this warning gets out to as many people as possible to help prepare for these possible events in the next several weeks. And that's all, my friends. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the future for any other videos I make down the road. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, y'all. Bye.